everyone, and welcome back to RAIA Affairs. My name is Francia Morales. I'll be your host for today. RAIA is a youth-led international think tank that translates the abstract world of international affairs by simplifying rather than generalizing. RAIA is a place where you come to learn about the stories and worries of political leaders, the behind the scenes of decision makers, and how politics impacts and changes your life. This is RAIA Affairs, filling you in wherever you are. As always, I would like to give a disclaimer by saying that expressed opinions in this episode are welcome, even though they might not be a direct reflection of RAIA, as we specialize in unbiased writing. This episode is the first in a series of 6 as a part of the IExRAIA Summer Research Program of 2024. RAIA has invited 12 IE university students to join our think tank and spend 9 weeks researching a figure from around the world to try to answer a simple question. Are they a climate leader? During their research, students have done a deep dive of the person's background, policies, and the impact of those policies in an effort to bring light to the diverse ways in which every person, no matter the role that they play in society, can contribute to the global climate change policy framework. In today's episode, we will be focusing on Sonam Phuntsho Wangdi from the Kingdom of Bhutan. Here with us, we have Maria de la Paz Gonzalez, also known as Pasita, and Sophia Rathleff. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our audience?
Thank you so much, Francia. I'm Sophia. I'm also an upcoming BIR student, but I study in the Segovia campus.
Thank you, Francia, so much for the introduction. I'm Pasita. I study BIR in International Relations at IE, and I'm an upcoming second year.
Very nice. Thank you for being here. And before we begin our hard-hitting questions, could you tell us, the both of you, which leader, either dead or alive, who has impacted the world, would you want to have a conversation or dinner with? We'll start with you, Pasita.
I would say Las Hermanas Mariposas, from the Dominican Republic. They basically started the whole feminist movement in South America. And I don't know, the way that they fought for women's rights and just kind of democracy itself really inspired me. So.
Very nice. That's a good question. And always a group of girls is fun to have dinner with. So great answer. Sophia, what about you?
This is a little more boring, but I think I would go with Christian X of Denmark. This is kind of a cop-out seeing as I'm Danish, but it's because he was basically the backbone of the Danish resistance during World War II. He managed to evacuate almost the entirety of the Danish Jewish population. So only about 150 Jewish people were captured, 50 were killed out of the hundreds of thousands of Jewish people in Denmark. And he also just kind of stuck it to the Nazis every moment he had the chance. So I think it'd be really cool to sit down with him and have a conversation with him about all of that.
Thank you for your answers. And now we're going to move on to your leader, Mr. Wangdi, as I'm going to be calling him because he has a long name and I'm not the best at pronouncing it. So we're going to move on with Mr. Wangdi. So in your own words, could you tell us who he is? Because during my Google searches, I did not feel like Google did him a lot of justice. So according to you, who is Sonam Phuntsho Wangdi?
Yeah, that's true. There's not a lot of information about him on the internet, but Sonam Phuntsho Wangdi is the Secretary of the National Environment Commission for the Royal Government of Bhutan. For those who don't know, Bhutan's a relatively small country who's bordered by India and China. And they're landlocked, but they're home to part of the Himalayan mountain range. And they have a lot of rivers working through them, which, as you'll see, causes quite a few issues. But we'll talk about that later. Politically, they've been a constitutional monarchy since 2008. Before that, they were an absolute monarchy. And they were the first carbon neutral country in the world. But Sonam has a background in economics. He was a World Trade negotiator for Bhutan for many years in the early 2000s, spanning over some of the most important financial times in recent history. He sat on the National Happiness Committee. For those of you who don't know, Bhutan measures not on gross domestic product, but on gross national happiness, the only country in the world to do so. And then he went on to become the LDC, or the Less Developed Countries Climate Chair. And yeah, that's basically a rundown of his career. It's a small LinkedIn page.
Very nice. Maybe you could help him out to do that if he wants to be more found on the internet. But okay, so you mentioned already that Bhutan holds part of the Himalayan mountain range, and they're also smushed between China and India, who are pretty big players in the region. So what are the main climatic challenges facing Bhutan today?
So that's a very good question. As Sophia said, given Bhutan's location in Central Asia and their kind of mountainous geography, they have a particular set of challenges, especially to do with the vulnerability to climatic changes attributed to man-made global warming. Just to give our listeners a bit of background, Bhutan is climate neutral, as Sophia said. This means that they produce less CO2 than they offset. So just to give you some perspective, the nature in Bhutan offsets 4 times more CO2 than all of the industries in Bhutan produce. So this means that Bhutan is the first country to become carbon negative. This is done because the government is very protectionist of the environment due to their upholding of what Sophia already said, which is the gross national happiness, which kind of enshrines in the constitution that by law, 60% of Bhutan's surface land has to be forest cover. Now, because climate affects all countries, no matter their contribution to global emissions, Bhutan faces multiple challenges. So in our report, we identified 3 main ones, including water management, conservation challenges, and a struggle for implementation of sustainable energy sources. The reason for Bhutan's vulnerability stems mainly from a lack of infrastructure preparedness in the country. So first, in the case of water management, they are severely losing out on their water resource availability. About 78% of the population has access to clean drinking water, which that number severely decreases during monsoon seasons and dry seasons during the winter. This not only affects people's health, but their agriculture takes a serious hit in production. And also, natural disasters are catastrophic for the agricultural industry, which is even further aggravated by inefficient water management. So as I said before, conservation challenges play a big role. Okay, making the promise to keep anyone's country to 60% forest cover is a huge commitment, especially with the number of natural disasters that the country faces every year, which threatens that percentage. Forest fires play a huge role, especially because they have been increasing in the last few years due to rising temperatures. Not only that, but man-made problems such as illegal timber and growing urbanization. Lastly, Bhutan has been struggling with the implementation of sustainable energy. This might sound weird when you learn that hydropower energy producing industry is one of the biggest in Bhutan, but a key factor is found with what is done with the energy and the problems the industry faces. Most of the energy is exported to India while they import fossil fuels. This has many issues, such as energy security and, well, the issue of winter. Hydropower energy production can't operate during winter seasons because of ice creation, and kind of the lack of infrastructure to operate. Okay, if you were to open a hydropower station during the winter, the amount of energy it takes to warm up the station and keep the water from freezing takes most of the energy produced at the station. So in our report, we go over these more in depth, but in a nutshell, it's those 3.
Wow, okay. So that sounds like a lot for one small country to take care of. So how has Mr. Wangdi helped Bhutan address these issues?
So yeah, it's really interesting to watch Mr. Wangdi's career fluctuate. We see kind of a wave of international and domestic experiences that really aid in his ability to tackle these issues in a really broad scope. We see this through his economics background. His education is primarily in commerce and finance. So we see a really unique lens of an acute awareness of what financial challenges, especially kind of lesser developed countries face when it comes to implementing climate policy. So he uses this and his experience as a World Trade Organization negotiator on the international stage. He uses that experience to be able to recognize where Bhutan's disadvantages lie and where that can be tackled. His department now, his career in climate policy has been short-lived but fruitful. He only became head of the Environment Commission in 2019. So he's only been in the position for about 5 years at this point. But his department has spearheaded numerous projects in this time. A lot of them are outlined in our report, but to give an example, it's mostly setting up frameworks for the country to be able to work upon. They work upon 5-year and 10-year plans. It's been a big part of Bhutan's history ever since the 1960s around they started implementing them. And things like the National Environment Strategy of 2020. His department spearheaded this entire framework for numerous sets of 5 and 10-year plans to come, with the first haven't even finished yet. And we're seeing kind of these frameworks and guidelines to be able to adapt climate policy to Bhutan's specific issues that Basita outlined before. These broad-based approaches have allowed Bhutan to be able to specify their climate policy to be most effective for them. This is how we're seeing such rapid progress in their climate policy. As was mentioned before, we see climate neutrality has been one of their biggest upheld kind of victories and successes within climate policy. And this has only been able because they work really thoroughly in very specific sectors, but in multiple at once. So it's done they have multiple departments, with various different specifications and competencies, who are able to most effectively tackle what they have expertise on. And right at the head of all of these projects is Mr. Wangdi and his department, who are leading and monitoring most of these projects. But just to reiterate, his international role can't be understated. All of these experiences have been so important in gaining traction in the international community. We see him at COP conferences and all of these kind of different international summits on climate. He's arguably the face of Bhutan when it comes to climate policy. And this has just helped gain international traction. In his most recent projects, we've seen increased funding from the international community. And there's no doubt that this is because he has built such a prestigious image for Bhutan in terms of climate policy on the international scale.
Wow, okay. And as he works on all of these projects, which, as you stated, are numerous but highly specified, what are the main limitations that he faces when implementing them?
So, as Sophia was saying, we kind of split the policies into two. One is the national ones and then the international policies. Within the national policies, the main issues are the lack of infrastructure, which, imagine, even when they create roads in 2 years, in a couple of years, they're destroyed by rain, monsoons, glacier melts, all of these things which make it hard for the country to advance. There are obvious limitations, like the size of population, which is very small, workforce that comes with that, and all of these things that are needed to carry out the policies. Also political reasons, such as the royal government control of the country and therefore having to kind of follow their agenda. In addition, as an advocate for the LDCs, which, as Sophia said, are the least developed countries, Wangdi even commented and keeps commenting every time he kind of spoke, that Bhutan's limited financial resources create a need for international financing and external support. So trying to seek financial assistance makes Bhutan reliant on external actors that limit the implementation of the policies. And also on the international policies, well, there are obvious issues, mainly being that Bhutan isn't a world power, which translates to having limited attention in the international focus. But also the historical neglectance of countries like Bhutan, which make it hard to be a clear leader in environmental policies, mainly because their advancements have been attributed to having had and I say this with air quotes, air quotation marks, head start in the environmental trend, because they have been historically closed off to kind of outside interaction. And therefore, industrialization took place a few decades after the first countries did. Therefore, it is hard to be a leader of environmental policies when half of your country is covered in forest. Of course, it takes a lot of merits, but it's not the case for most countries in the world who cut down their forest cover a long time ago. So our report refutes this point by saying that Bhutan is the example and standard that all countries should be held up to. And their commitment to maintain forest cover is no easy task, especially with all of the climatic issues that threaten it that I mentioned before.
Wow, that really does sound like a feat for the country. So, what has given Wangdi the motivation to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so I think we can see it stemming from quite a few places. Obviously, these challenges have Bhutan has been wrought with them for quite a few years. And there's consistent efforts to build upon this, but that we have to recognize that consistently going after this with what Basita has mentioned, with like a lack of international support at times, takes a lot of willpower. And the motivations behind it are quite strong, which has allowed Mr. Wangdi and his departments to keep fighting onwards and keep kind of chipping away at these issues one by one. One of the first motivations we can see is kind of a broad umbrella scope for the entire of Bhutan and all kind of civil servants. It's the strong cultural base that Bhutan has. It's already been mentioned before, but the gross national happiness system is unique. It's completely unique to Bhutan. It's something that they've built upon based on their own cultural values. And it is something that deeply treasures their environmental resources, their natural kind of landscape. It's something that is deeply treasured within the kind of Bhutanese psyche. It's very much part of everything that they do. It's an oversight committee for the entire government. It's like the Gross National Happiness Commission is a complete oversight of the government, and it is the base for everything that is done within policy, not just climate policy, but all policy within Bhutan. We can see that this is very kind of deeply entrenched in Mr. Wangdi. He was part of the Gross National Happiness Commission at one point. So he has these values very kind of deeply within his motivations. And we can also see more on the cultural basis that Buddhism as a religion is one of the key pillars of Bhutan as a country. We see that the religion is very much focused on environmental conservationism, and the ability to bring this religion into the national identity has been key in building them and modernizing their environmental policy. We can see that this religion plays a huge role in most Bhutanese citizens' lives, and that includes Mr. Wangdi. So that deeply religious values and moral guide and ethical guide has played a key role in motivating him to be able to effectively care about these issues. Additionally, we see that Mr. Wangdi was awarded the Civil Service Gold Medal for 30 years of distinguished service. So that kind of gives us an indication on how dedicated he is to his country. We can see genuine kind of care for the work that he does. His motivations seem to be to his country and for his country. Obviously, that comes with the caveat that all civil servants in Bhutan serve the monarchy. And that is a very core part of being a civil servant in Bhutan. So we want to kind of just recognize that, but also we can see that he goes above and beyond most civil servants. And he's changed position multiple times. So his commitment to the government as a whole isn't just limited to his one scope. So we see that a huge motivation for him is just serving his country. And finally, this is more for his international work. We see injustice come up as a motivation quite a lot. He was an LDC chair. This brings a lot of realities to light. We can see that this has happened for many who have held this position. They see that LDCs do not get the support they should. This is just a reality of the international community at this point. We see that the LDCs don't get the financial support. They don't get the international spotlight that they need to be able to effectively raise awareness about their issues. So I think that his work, but especially on an international sphere, is working towards building a different narrative. He wants to reverse that slightly and make it so these countries have the ability to progress with their climate goals alongside their developmental goals.
So do you think that he has been ultimately successful in transforming Bhutan?
I would say in a short answer format, yes. However, there are many factors to take into account. In terms of environmental protectionism, a lot of work that he did is either building on previously existing policies, which have worked great for Bhutan, or, as we have titled him, become the modernizer of policies by introducing technology and efficiency. Now, Bhutan has a long way to go, but Wangdi definitely was the chief architect of Bhutan becoming a climate leader worldwide, and the policies that followed. His presence, as we have said, at COP conferences and international stages have allowed Bhutan to be known for their environmental policies. So if we were to analyze the implementation of the policies that he has been developing during his tenure as Secretary of the National Environment Commission, it would be hard to do kind of the novelty of them. However, they do target all of the issues that Bhutan has been facing in recent years, especially in the works of hydropower, which in this case, the Water Resource Management Plant has had successful strategies in mitigating natural disasters, damages due to kind of infrastructure. Then a new idea is introduced and carried to the second nationally determined contribution, and which underscores kind of the climate and disaster resilience. But however, the most intricate policy developed is the National Adaptation Plan, which takes into account economic pressure points to assess where projects can be created to tackle and decrease Bhutan's climatic vulnerability.
Great. And as we're nearing our end of the interview, could you please tell our listeners, what does Wangdi's work and Bhutan's climate change policy mean for them? Why does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair for our listeners to go, this is a tiny landlocked country in the middle of two global superpowers. What could that possibly have to do with kind of climate policy as a whole? But I think I would argue all eyes should be on Bhutan. Bhutan has placed itself in the center of climate policy as an example and a leader and a champion for climate change in the face of adversity. It will be really, really interesting to see how Bhutan develops itself, continues its projected economic growth while maintaining its carbon neutrality. If that becomes possible, which academics are on both sides, saying that it will be possible or it will collapse. At this point, it's up to Bhutan. If that's possible, if it's done, that should be a real wake-up call for countries, especially larger states. I think what we can see here is an arguable shift in the narrative. It's kind of a flip of roles, like a reverse of roles, where huge industrialized countries like the US or the UK, and now kind of building up China, have been kind of fighting for green energy and talking about kind of green policies and that kind of thing. But now we're seeing smaller countries like Bhutan, who do not have the same kind of economic fighting power. They're building up this climate reputation of actually being able to talk about these policies and implement them. It's the action that we're seeing from countries like Bhutan that is so key. So to watch Bhutan grow and hopefully maintain its climate success in the progress is really important for, I think, everybody to pay attention to, because it will be huge, and it is huge now, and it deserves more recognition than it has gotten.
So, to conclude, in your own words, is Wangdi a climate leader?
So to assess this, I have a little definition of what the UNFCCC defines as a climate leader. And they say that it is someone that strengthens climate action and ambition at any level to help combat climate change. So we think that the word leader, or being labeled a leader, should be held up kind of to a higher standard, to say. It should not only be someone that strengthens climate action and ambition, it should be someone that inspires it and creates change within their community. Of course, Wangdi is one of them. He's a crucial climate leader, especially for countries that face similar economic and development challenges. He's someone to look up to, he's someone to admire, and definitely he's someone to follow in his footsteps as in your own country, or to kind of hold inspiration.
Wow, Pas, I think that's actually a great answer to that question. And I think it might be something that the copy editors of the UNF3C might want to keep in mind when they write their next description of a climate leader. But that concludes our interview today. Thank you, Pas and Sophia, for coming to speak with us about your report and about your article, both of which are published now at RAIAgroup.org. Thank you to our audience for listening, and if you like this episode, please make sure to share with your friends so that more people can go read Sophia and Pas's great research. This has been part 1 of a 6-part series of the IExRAIA Summer Research Program of 2024, where we have analyzed Sonam Phuntsho Wangdi. If you want to listen to the next one, make sure to stay tuned on our social media channels such as Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.